Today's World-Beater Wrestling is an ASMR episode. Apparently this will get me 1 million views. Don't let me down, guys.
Maybe not. But today's World-Beater Wrestling is all about finding new perspective as to whether you should take new opportunities or not. So when I talk about opportunities, I guess I'm referring to things like major tryouts or new booking opportunities. And the first thing you're probably thinking is, of course you should take new opportunities, there's no question. And I'm all aboard with that train of thought. But that's not to say that sometimes perceived obstacles don't cloud your judgment and decision making. These obstacles may be legit, or they could be a product of overthinking. But this episode is going to break down exactly what those obstacles might be and how you should approach your decision making depending on your individual needs and values in life. So I guess a good place to start would be looking at what the most common perceived obstacles are. And from my own career, there's definitely 3 that have stood out time and time again. Now, earlier in my career, with admittedly little self-confidence and probably a lack of awareness over my self-worth, I did struggle with readiness. That being, how ready I thought I was for any new opportunities. Did I think I was going to butcher my first impression and lose all potential future opportunities or not? Now, I often think back to a story from earlier in my career. In 2007, I was wrestling around California and training in the SoCal indie scene, and a couple of my mentors were actually booked on a PWG All-Star Weekend series of events. So I tagged along, intending on sitting in the crowd and enjoying the weekend of wrestling, and then someone didn't show up for their match. So my mentors actually told me they'd put my name forward and I was probably going to get this massive opportunity. In that moment, I remember thinking there's nothing I would want to do less right now than put myself out there and wrestle on this star-studded card full of people I've looked up to for years. Obviously, that's not a very optimistic thinking pattern, but you've got to understand the sheer anxiety of a 19-year-old wrestler from South Australia being put in this major opportunity with next to no prep time. So in my mind, I had the thought that I was going to ruin every future opportunity that could possibly come my way. But it's only in the last few years that I've realized that even if that opportunity did go ahead, it might not have been the worst thing in the world. Of course, good chance I wouldn't have stood out, I wouldn't have been on the same level as many of the other talent on the card, but it would have been a fantastic learning experience, and it would have got my name out there just a little bit. Now, often we think that if we do make a poor first impression, those opportunities might dry up. But from my experience, I've seen that that's very rarely the case. I've had so many peers of mine who have made terrible first opportunities or really didn't show their worth at major tryouts. But they almost always got that second opportunity down the line. With a bit of consistency and always pushing forward, always improving and always knocking on that door, those opportunities will come back. People make mistakes and people improve. Anyone who's worth anything knows this. And if they don't, they're not worth your time. You've got to understand that we're always competing with tens of thousands of pro wrestlers from all around the world. And it's often the ones who are the most consistent, who are always investing in themselves and taking opportunities that eventually rise to the top. Now, if you always wait until you're ready in your own mind, that day may never come. Or those opportunities may never come back because you declined them the first time. You're no longer seen as trustworthy or ambitious. And the one consistent from speaking to top talent scouts, bookers, and coaches from around the world is that they place such a high value in being able to take feedback on board, being coachable, and improving from opportunity A to B to C to D. They want to see you evolve. If you can do that, suddenly your potential is limitless. So in my mind, never use readiness as an excuse to not take any opportunity. In reality, you've probably got nothing to lose. The next 2 perceived hurdles are definitely ones I've come in contact with a little bit later in life as I've picked up other obligations and had things like family life start to be held with a greater value. Now, this will be very individualized. You may be a bachelor or bachelorette who really has no obligation outside of pro wrestling, in which case your values will be very different from someone who has kids, a family who is the sole breadwinner, because these two obstacles are money and time. When I speak of money, I'm talking about spending money to take opportunities. And earlier in your career, sometimes you don't have the luxury of breaking even or making money. Sometimes you have to fly yourself places to get seen and noticed. In my recent WWE Try episode, I spoke about the time when I had to fly from Adelaide to Columbus, Ohio on pretty short notice, which definitely cost me a pretty penny, and it put me in debt for at least a few months. But it was a decision I came to for many reasons. A, because the perceived value of such an opportunity was so great. It was something that I was definitely going to learn from. It was something that would definitely get my name out and get me seen by some pretty important people. And it could, and actually did, directly lead to more major opportunities. On top of that, I was single at the time. No one was relying on me as the primary breadwinner. And I had a full-time job. So I knew that the money would eventually come back. It was worth a little bit of financial discomfort, although I don't recommend maxing out the credit card if you can help it. But of course, if you're in a situation where you are the primary breadwinner and you have people relying on you to keep them alive, then obviously your value is going to be very different to mine. See, for me, pro wrestling was number one value, and money, time didn't come close. But for you, maybe money is a massive value to you and your family's lives. In which case, you have to weigh up your options. Is it going to be worth the discomfort? Is it going to be worth the struggle? So when I speak of time, I'm talking about time away from friends or responsibilities or hobbies or obligations or anything you do in your day-to-day life. And often as pro wrestlers, particularly in Australia, we do have to spend 2, 3, 6 months traveling the world to increase our knowledge base and to get our name out there if we really want to make it. And those 2 to 3 months in the moment seem like a long time. But fingers crossed, we do have ample time. And while it may be an adjustment, it may be a sacrifice when you've spent every single day with your wife, with your husband, with your kids, if it's something that leads you towards happiness, success, achievement, and the things that you hold with a high value, then it's a sacrifice you may need to make. And in the grand scheme of things, 2 to 3 months in comparison to a 20-year career or a 50, 60, 70-year plus relationship, hopefully, isn't a great deal of time. Sacrificing time away from family, in addition to little things like spending time, effort, and money on training, wrestling gear, dieting, knowledge, they're all investments into your career. So often it comes down to you and your personal values. Do you value things like money, time, and family above your wrestling career? And if that's the case, then you have to accept that your wrestling career may not reach the heights that they could potentially reach had you sacrificed these things and gone purely towards this. Now, personally speaking, things like money and time have way more value now than they did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would take any opportunity that came my way. To me, it was all a learning experience. But now, as my values and perceptions and also experiences in wrestling have changed, and of course, in doing so, my short and long-term goals have changed, I place much more thought before clicking yes to an opportunity. And regardless of where you're at in your journey, I think you should think about some certain things too. For me, I have a little checklist that I like to use. So the first thing I like to think about is whether it'll be an excellent learning opportunity. Now, of course, you should be able to take every experience, no matter how negative, as a learning opportunity. And it's all about having the right mindset. But what I mean by this is perhaps a match earlier in your career, even if it's only a 5-minute match in front of a minimal crowd, and the match isn't going to be seen by many people, but you're wrestling someone with more experience. That is suddenly a very good learning opportunity. Whereas after close to 20 years, being in the same situation and then wrestling someone with less experience, while you will take plenty from that, may not be worth sacrificing your time if you hold that as a high value. I also think about how many eyes will see that match or that opportunity. Are you being presented to the right people? Will it get you closer to your goals? If so, could be a fantastic opportunity. I also think about whether it could directly lead to greater things in your career, things that will get you towards your long-term goals. Again, another tick. And of course now, financial rewards do play a part in the decision making. Will I get paid what I know that I'm worth? Because if not, it may not be worth the sacrifice of spending a whole weekend away from loved ones. This very much comes down to a trade-off and something that only you can really decide for yourself. Balance is one of the hardest things to manage, not just in pro wrestling, but also in life. Unfortunately, you can't put 100% effort into every little endeavor. The more you have, the more difficult it becomes. But it's all about being honest with yourself, analyzing your own values, and then making your decisions based on that. And if you go ahead with it and you aren't successful, or if it doesn't prove to be the opportunity you first thought it might be, then see it as an investment into your future. If it was a learning experience for you, it's a plus. And sometimes those little roads that we open up earlier in our career can sometimes become the road that you were searching so hard to find that led you to those long-term goals. And often, it's when you didn't even see it coming.
If you want to see more videos like this, click on the subscribe button, spread the word, and if you have any questions or requests for World Beater Wrestling, don't be afraid to comment below.